me to introduce myself and, first of all, our guests. I'm Alexander Apostolidis from Department of Economic Accounting and Finance in the European University of Cyprus. We thought of doing this event when I met him to meet you in December, and he said everyone was talking about Cyprus except Cypriots. And we said we should start talking about the issue of sovereign debt in Cyprus and involve Cypriots in the debate. This is part of the Department of Accounting and Economics and Finance's new revamp program that we're trying to launch. We're also launching 2 new master's programs in the Department of Law here in the European University of Cyprus. We're going to have this as a small departmental meeting, but we saw a lot of interest. So thank you for coming. I mean, it's important to start thinking about these issues. So allow me to introduce our speakers in the order of their presentations, and then I'll let the speakers themselves present their cases. Just so you know, you're allowed to record this event until the presentations. After that, we will have to ask you please to refrain from recording the question and answer session so we can have a free-flowing question and answer session. Okay? So, first, Fiona. Fiona Mullen, for me, is one of the premier people working on Cyprus. She's been an active analyst of the Cyprus economy since 2001. She worked for the Economist Intelligence Unit and was a special advisor to the UN for matters relating to Cyprus. And I think she was an innovator when she wrote with Praxoul Antoniadou Kyriakidou and Ozelem Oguz the Day After series, which is a series of papers saying what would happen after a solution, positives, negatives. And I think it started a really nice debate of what we should be preparing after a solution of Cyprus, and is one of the first recipients with the aforementioned 2 other ladies of the Seios Hagioannou Foundation Awards for Business Cooperation. And Fiona will start by looking at Cyprus debt sustainability. Then we'll have Mitu Giulati. Mitu Giulati is a professor of law in Duke University, previously being in Chicago, Georgetown, Virginia, and a law clerk at the Law of Appeals in New York and Boston. They have this is late Cypriots, I think, coming in. Apologies, I think I will switch it off. Sorry, Mitu, for interrupting your biography. He's written over 70 publications on several issues. Pari passu clauses, which means ranking equally clauses, sovereign debt lending, collective action clauses, role of international lawyers in contracting, bias in judicial citations, racial diversity in law, and many, many other issues. My personal favorite of the list is, which there are 3 papers in front of you if you want, is the co-authored paper with Lee Bouquet, who is also here, the Eurozone Crisis, the Options Now, which I think clarifies the options of the Eurozone in a way that economists fail to do. And that's why we have organized this event. And finally, Mr. Lee Bouquet. Lee is a partner in the New York office of Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton LLP. He's a specialist in international transactions and privatization, but mostly noted for his work in sovereign debt management. I've lost count of the countries that Lee has represented in sovereign debt issues and sovereign debt restructuring. I don't think he would want me to say which ones, but I can safely say he was one of the main movers in the issue of Greece. Actually, their co-authored paper with me too on how Greece could restructure was the basis of the Greek restructuring known as the PSI. At 2010, Mr. Bouquet received an International Financial Law Review's inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to international finance, and he was last year's in the Financial Times U.S. Most Innovative Lawyers report as one of the 10 most innovative individuals for his work at Greek debt restructuring. I could go on for a very long time talking about all 3 of our speakers. I'll just quickly say also that Lee combines his law profession with an active academic interest, being a visiting lecturer in many universities, including Chuo University in Japan, Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, Duke University Law School, New York University Law School, and visiting professional fellow in the Center for Commercial Law Studies at the University London. We could talk about their work also at the Greek government debt. I'm sure it will come in their own conversations, but I think it's better to let the speakers themselves first say it. So we'll start with Fiona Mullen. Thank you very much.
No, not quite.
Is it too short?
I'm not sure. No, not going to. All right, I'll talk like this. First of all, I want to thank Alex for his magnanimity in giving the floor to me alongside our very distinguished guest rather than taking it himself. He's obviously been looking at this issue quite a bit himself, and I hope we'll benefit from his insights in the debate. So I'm going to run through a bit essentially the various options for debt sustainability, and from an economist's point of view, what are the various issues with all of those. What's our hard deadline? We were actually this morning, I can update this, apparently we now run out of money at the end of April, not the end of March. Maybe because of the 150 million that we just got from signing Eni and Kogas gas blocks. So maybe we can keep hobbling on until May or June, but the really hard deadline is the 3rd of June, when there's a 1.4 billion Eurobond payment. It's called EMTN. And if we can't pay that, then we go bust, and we're not just junk status, we're basket case status. It takes a very, very long time to get back from default status. There were 4 main obstacles to the bailout. One of them, since the in-principle agreement on in mid-November, is gone. So at least now the government has sort of agreed that it's going to. Well, we know that the next president's going to sign. Let's face it. There's now 3 obstacles left. The German opposition, and I think that's the biggest risk for us. The German press is really, really, really scathing about Cyprus. Without question, they say Cyprus is a centre for money laundering. Full stop. They don't bother listening to any of the international reports about Cyprus and its record and so on. And this is related to the parliamentary elections. So you have opposition MPs who've got a majority in the upper house of the German parliament saying, why should Germans waste their tax money on saving mafia deposits? And there's a little bit of jealousy there. I think, there are, 86 German companies, shipping companies based in Limassol. So they're just a little bit envious. But it's a very real risk when it comes to getting the bailout. The second risk, and this is very much a debate in European circles at the moment, is Cyprus too small to fail? Too small to bother? Is it really a systemic risk to the Eurozone? Because apparently the rules of the bailouts are it has to be a systemic risk before we use EU taxpayers' money to save Cyprus. We've got the ECB and the European Commission on our side. At the moment, we've got Schäuble, German finance minister, against. But this morning there was a report from the Süddeutsche Zeitung, one of the German papers, saying Schäuble is coming under pressure to say, yes, it is systemic, we do need to help Cyprus. And then the third issue, which again is the one of great interest to economists, is this whole question about sustainability. Can we pay it back? And what's the debt-GDP ratio if the PIMCO number comes in at 10 billion? Just quickly, I think it's still going to be a very strong risk, but the government has taken government and political leaders, they've taken a few actions to address the German concerns. We've had the MPs in Brussels. Charles Lies more or less said, come and get us, we're not afraid of anything, come and check our banking system. There are other PR initiatives underway, and as I say, we seem to have support from the ECB and the EC. And I think the tide, I would say, it's been very good for my German, this crisis, and my Greek. It's toning down a little bit. It's still pretty bad in Germany, but it's not as bad as it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So how much? What's the problem? The problem is essentially, and these are my own forecasts. Some people think we'll reach 140% of GDP next year, but I think you've got to consider the banks aren't going to borrow all of this money straight away. They need a chunk this year, but they'll be borrowing it over a space of years. But at least according to my own predictions, we'll get to about, getting on for 140% of GDP by 2016 if the bank capitalisation needs a 10. But the good news is that we only need to find 3 billion to bring it to 120% of GDP. Now, Alex will tell you that's not the historical ratio for sustainability, but it seems to be the one that the IMF might live with. Is if we can bring it under 120, they might be nice to us. So we've only got to find 3 billion. And this is where there's a lot of hysteria about the ratio, but it's not really very much in terms of actual numbers. Like I say, there are 8 options doing the rounds. I think we can dismiss number 1 straight away. That's not going to happen soon enough. The others I'll go through and explain as we go in, but they are so the first one is the idea that the EU lends directly to the banks instead of to the government. The second one is essentially the Greek-style haircut. The third one, which I've tried to put in scary letters, is what's called the deposit haircut. The fourth one is those poor sods who changed their deposits to convertible bonds and will now realise that they might end up as worthless shares. The other one, the fifth one, if you like, is the Lelikas idea. I'll go into whether that's possible or not. Privatisation, and then playing with the maturities of the loans. None of these is straightforward. The idea of direct recapitalisation of banks, it would help a great deal, but it's not going to happen soon enough to save us. If it happens, it will help a lot, but it's still a little bit in the air, and we don't know if, even when it comes into force, it will have retroactive effect. Certainly too late for our June deadline. The next big idea is the haircut on bonds. It has some legal questions, which I'll leave to our distinguished guests, but the problem with the only really haircuttable bonds are the EMTN, so these euro bonds. The total outstanding for those are 3.8 billion, but I am told by very good sources that a chunk of that is, I think it's 1.1 is held by local banks. So the net effect of cutting the EMTN is really you're only, in net terms, cutting 2.5 billion. So, but if you put a 75% haircut on 2.5 billion, you get nearly 2 billion. So the question is, does Europe want to do that? Can you do it legally, and so on? But it's one of the options on the table. The deposit haircut, how much would you earn from that? Inferring from what the Public Debt Management Office says about the government liability for the insured deposits, the contingent liability. Government's liability is 35 billion. We know that total deposits are 70 billion. So does that mean the other 35 are all over 100,000? That was at the end of 2011. I'm sure anybody with over 100,000 has spread it around a bit now, so maybe the figure's lower than that now. So obviously there's lots and lots of problems with this. What will it do? I think it will kill our banking system dead, I mean, as I've written before, this is a banking system that survived an invasion, and now you're going to do this to it. It will kill off the professional services sector, which is the only sector that's been creating jobs in the past few years. We'll be back to a sort of cash-only economy, and that's no good for me because I can't even keep houseplants alive, let alone grow potatoes, despite my Irish blood. So, and like I say, will it end up as another big fat liability for the Cyprus sovereign with these uninsured deposits, even insured deposits, sorry. Then there's the convertible bonds question. I'm reliably informed that could raise 1.2 billion. So these were the people who had deposits, were persuaded to switch them from a deposit scheme to an investment scheme that was essentially a convertible bond. Now they're paying no interest. They're sort of in a limbo, but they may well be turned into equity, i.e. shares, and that goes straight into the bank's core tier 1 capital, so it knocks immediately 1.2 billion off the Troika bill. So in a sense, it's a political issue. How many of these people are retail investors? Were they missold, etc., etc.? Can you get away with it politically? It's going to be a political question whether that's used. The forward selling the gas, we have to be realistic here. You'll get no money from gas before our hard deadline of 3rd of June. And even then, we're not going to get enough money to cover the whole of the bailout requirements. Just as a reminder, next door, Israel's Leviathan, which is 19 trillion cubic feet, they sold a 30% interest in that in December for $2.5 billion, which is only about just under 2 billion euros. And that's Israel's much further down the line than we are in exploiting the gas. They've proven the reserves. We haven't proven our reserves. But they had to pay. Woodside got it on the cheap because Israel hasn't made a decision about whether it's going to export yet or not. And it doesn't know where it's going to put an LNG plant because it's a very sensitive issue. We don't have those two issues, but we have other issues. So we're not going to make any money anytime soon on that. And even when we do, it's probably going to be based on the net present value, not the if you just convert all the gas in the ground and turn that into today's price for LNG. So that bit is where I do agree with Lilikas. It could be worth whatever his number is, 60 billion, I think, or something. But can you turn that into cash? No, you can't. So, and even I've got in my report, which I'll shamelessly plug in a minute, I've done my first cut of a net present value for the gas. It's a bit of a work in progress, but it might not be as high as 6 billion. But eventually we will get a lot of gas. It could be even 1 to 1.5 billion per year. Privatisation. My hunch is, in the short term at least, maybe we'll only get 2 billion because, things have to be restructured and so on and so forth. But these figures come from Costas. Thank you very much, Costas. Some of the insured assets comes from Stylianiou, but the others from Costas. There's quite a lot of assets out there for the three main targets, CETA, Electricity Authority, and the Ports Authority. So it could, I think, 10 billion maybe in the long term, but in the short term, to keep the IMF happy, maybe we should go with a more cautious estimate. So just to summarise those options, I've knocked off the direct recap because it's not going to happen. The bond haircut, maybe we can get nearly 2 billion, but the EU doesn't really want to do that. Deposit haircut, it's going to be very damaging. Hopefully no one apart from the German opposition wants that. The cocoa bail-in, maybe we'll get 2.1 billion. Beg your pardon, I think it was 1.2. Sorry, 1.2. But is the government going to get into trouble for a mis-selling issue? Privatisation, 2 billion. We've got the unions to deal with. But I think we're going to be forced to do one of these. So it's really going to be a matter of what the government, what's the political costs and so on. And again, this is why the government has been so... and the central bank have been so focused on is the PIMCO number 10 billion or 9 billion, is because if you can get 2 from one of these and you can bring the 10 down to 9, then you fix the problem essentially. But I think we've still got the IMF is still going to be quite critical here because they're the ones who have who are most concerned about it. Just to say, maturities, which I'll talk about next. I've stolen this chart, a nice chart from Nomura. You probably can't see the numbers at the back, but essentially the red is where you've got the big spikes in payment. And this is why maturities is such an important issue, and maybe we'll fix our sustainability issue. It might not bring the debt ratio down, but it will help us to actually be able to pay the debt back, which is the fundamental question in the end. There's some big debt spikes here in 2013 and 2016. So if the Russians, I know there are discussions about getting the Russians to extend the loan that we borrowed in late 2011 and early 2012. Instead of paying it back in July 2016, we pay it in instalments. We were going to pay it back in one bullet. God knows who decided that. So instead of doing that, pay it back over 3 years. I think we, you know, with the argument that there's gas revenue coming, that maybe we'll get direct recapitalisation from the ESM, and we could move to I think we might even move to primary surplus this year, but at least I think by next year we could well be in primary surplus. Thanks mainly, I mean, only 100